everybody. Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist for Triumph, Mike Levine. Yay!
Hey, Raul. How are you, my friend?
Doing great, doing great. Mike, it's so great to have a chance to talk to you. You know, Triumph has been an iconic hard rock band for decades and decades. It goes back to when we both had no gray, but we're going to go even farther back than that and find out a little bit how you developed in music and particularly on bass.
Okay, so to make a long story, probably I have to keep this relatively short. It could go on for, I don't know how much tape you have in your machine. But I took piano lessons as a kid. I have a little background. My father was a professional bass player. He played the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. He was a jazz guy. He was the first call jazz bassist in Toronto when, Duke Ellington needed a bass player. Sam Levine would get the call. Red Dorval, Lionel Hampton. Played with all the greats. So that really didn't influence me much bass-wise, but I was forced to take piano lessons as a kid. And the moment that I could stop playing piano and taking lessons, so I could go play ball and football and hockey with my friends after school, I stopped. And basically, I was grade 8 conservatory, grade 2 theory. That counted as a grade for me in high school. But it didn't really thrill me. It was just too much hard work. Mm-hmm. But then a bunch of friends, we started a band. This would have been in 65, I guess we were in grade 10, I think, in high school. It was drums, piano, and 17 guitar players. Wow. And we were really bad. Nobody could really play, and it was horrible. So we kind of just kept weeding it down. So there was like 3 guitar players, piano player, and drum. And then everybody we went, well, we got to get a bass player. And everybody looked at me and said, well, Levine, your dad plays bass, so I guess you're the bass player. So off I tropped to the music store, buy a bass, buy an amp, which I really couldn't afford, but, we were having fun. So, we played high school assemblies. We played, dances at basements of bakeries, whatever. And it was a neat time because there were virtually no local band, right? There was, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and I don't know what was the name of our band, Howling Masses, I think, or the Fadeaways. We had all kinds of different names. But it was cool because you were like a superstar. The girls liked you, and then the boys would come where the girls were. So we always had kind of, it held 50 people in the church basement. We did 60 people kind of thing. So it was fun. So through high school, we played. After high school, there was no band. I don't think I went off to college. But then it didn't really agree with me, and I ended up joining a band that played called The Data, which was a city band, downtown Toronto, hard rhythm and blues band. We wore striped suits and stuff, but it was cool, and we gigged around, and we were like kind of an important band on the scene. And that graduated into from The Data. That band blew up. Then the next iteration of The Data, a few of the guys and me, we started like this big R&B band. 2 singers, horns, the whole 9 yards, right? So it was called Terry and the Pirates. We got a kind of a record deal, I'll call it, to do a single, which was kind of cool because bands weren't getting recording contracts, but there was a band in the States called Terry and the Pirates as well. So we couldn't use that name. So we changed the name, changed the record label, came up with this brilliant idea. Let's call it Aurora Borealis. We had, well, what the hell, who cares? It doesn't really matter. We're in the studio making a record, which when I don't know if you remember, singer that sang, female singer, R&B, Motown, Tammy Terrell, who sang with Marvin Gaye, They Come Down High Enough and those songs. Her brother, Jimmy Terrell, produced the record. So it wasn't like we were just amateurs. It was a good studio. We did a studio called Eastern Sound. But again, the record went nowhere, and eventually the band kind of fizzled out.
It is always so interesting where the dynamics of bands, and so many times you'll hear, especially the young bands, they'll give it a go, and then will not necessarily have a friendly breakup, and but there's a splintering off, and somebody will go to the next place, or it's having an instrument could be just the prerequisite just to get into the band. The first rock band I played with, we were a four-person band. We had a drummer, two guitars, we didn't have a bass, and a tambourine player, and that was only because that's all he could play. So
but he had a tambourine, right?
There you go. We had a tambourine, and it was the 60s, and so that's really, it was like of the time. So as we move forward, how did Triumph come about?
After that last experience, I somehow, not sure actually how it really happened, but I ended up working with a record label, a small record label called Revolution Records, and they had a hit with Motherlode, When I Die was the song. Mm-hmm. Mort Ross was the president of the company. So I started working with Mort, and we signed a couple of acts and we raised a bunch of money from Bay Street. And we made a record with a kid named James Robert Ambrose, but we did it in New York. In upstate New York, at a studio called 911. 911, something like that. Studios with Brooks Arthur, mm-hmm. who was, like a Academy Award-winning recording engineer, was the engineer on it. He owned the studio. And guys like Teddy Randazzo, who wrote Tears of a Clown and Little Anthony the Imperials and all that, they were hanging around. I would have around all these great musicians. Just like I was a kid, I was like 21 years old here. Mm-hmm. And I just learned a lot. I absorbed. I was a sponge. I learned. I talked to people, and it was quite an experience. So we did the James Robert Ambrose record. We made a record with a guy named Larry Kaplan, who was actually he was the contractor, sax player, New York sax player. He was the contractor for the Ambrose record, because we hire a lot of musicians. And Artie was just a piece of work. He's the guy the sax was on a lot of old records, like the sax solo on Locomotion by Little League. That's Artie Kaplan playing that solo. And when Barry 1, 2, 3, sax solo is Kaplan. So he was like a big time session in the States. So we got great players to play on that. They all worked with Artie, and Artie gave them a lot of work. So a lot of them didn't want to get paid, But I'm still a kid in New York. We're staying in suites at nice hotels. It's like I thought. Then one day, when the wheels, left the tracks and we ran out of money because the records were made great huge sellers. But I learned a lot about the record business, which was really good for me. So then started doing jingles, writing and producing jingles, like, for Ford, General Motors, beer companies, you name it. It was horrible. You'd have to record like at 8 o'clock in the morning, so all the ad agency people could go start drinking by lunchtime. So it was like, it was an alcoholic's business, and I was turning into an alcoholic. It's like, because you drank with these guys to keep the business going. Yeah. And during that time, Gil Moore, a drummer extraordinaire for Triumph, he had a band called Abernathy Shagmaster's Wash and Wear Band. It's a part-time band, they played high schools and stuff, high school bands on the weekends, that kind of thing. So Gil and I had known each other a bit from just being on the scene. So he calls me up and asked me if I could fill in. For 3 weeks, he was in between bass players. Now, I haven't played much except for I played on a lot of the jingles, but hadn't really played professionally in a while. They're in the band. I said, I don't have time. I'd love to help you, but I'm not going to do it. And he was tenacious and just stayed after me. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. It turned out to be a lot of fun. It was neat. The 3 weeks turned into 3 months. The 3 months turned into 6 months. And the bass player that was supposed to be coming never came. So there I am in this band, and I'm going like, okay, this is interesting. So I said, Gil and I sit down and say, why don't we take a real shot here? Like just this band, so it's never happened, and start a new group. So what would be the ideal group? 3 pieces, not that many personalities to deal with, 2 out of 3, on a vote wins, everybody's going to be on the short end. There's no hang-ups going on, 3 guys against 2, that kind of thing. Okay, so that would be easy to get along. So provided everybody's got a good personality, perfect. Now you've got a future because that's going to be okay. But okay, so 3-piece band. So what do you need? You got bass and drums, you need a guitar player, but you need a sensational guitar player. You've got to be your average road guy. He's got to be able to sing, he's got to be able to dance, you've got to have all the parts. So we looked around and played with a few guys. An agent/manager we knew said, you guys should check out this guy called Rick Emmett. He plays in a band called Three. He's playing at the Queensbury Arms this weekend, Friday, Saturday nights. So Bill and I go, and we watch, and we went, oh yeah, this guy. So we approached him, he came over and sat with us, and by that time, through one of my connections, we had a record deal. We didn't have a band, but we had a record deal. Wow. With a company called Attic Records, which went on to be a pretty good label, deal at that point. But I knew one of the partners very well. So I took him to lunch and just said, look, I'm putting together the world's greatest rock band. It's going to be 3 days. It's going to be bigger than Let's Up, but it's going to be, we're going to set the world on fire. And he looks at me, sure, yeah. Right? I said, no, Tom, I'm dead serious. This is going to be something. It's going to be incredible. Trust me. When I need a record deal and a check. And so we talked about some money, and we wrote a check and signed Bill and I, and some future guitar player at that point. So we were able to show Rick that we had a record deal in place, that we had money from the record company. And it's like he's like going forward. I'm slugging it out with this band and getting nowhere fast, and these guys don't have a band, they got a record deal. I get to go to the studio here, kind of thing. He joined us, and that's how Triumph started.
Wow. Well, and it is interesting, the dynamic, because as you mentioned, having just 3 musicians, it certainly helps with evening out the kind of personalities. A lot less people to have to appease when it comes to, what they want. But probably musically, more importantly, you guys generated a lot of sound for 3 people on stage. And it certainly between, again, I was watching your Rick, the lead guitarist, with a double neck guitar and singing, and then huge drum kit, so a lot of sound coming out of that monster kit, and then you had the secondary portion, because bass doing both percussive and melodic efforts, but you're also filling the void a lot more where other instruments might be helping to fill that in. It was a very full sound when you consider it came from 3 guys. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, it was interesting, and that just kind of came. A lot of it had to do with, and I credit my father with this, because one day he said, "Well, why don't I try and teach you how to play stand-up bass?" And I said, "Well, that sounds like a cool idea. Why not?" Uh-huh. So, but halfway through the lesson, we decided that this is not going to work out very well. We were getting into nothing but discussions about possibility, it just was not good. So we decided to pack that. And so he said, okay, one thing you're going to take away from this lesson, as a bass player, remember this, you're part of a rhythm section. So it's not what you play that's important, it's what you don't play that's important. Mm-hmm. Like you have to leave room for the instruments that are supposed to be doing all that playing on top. And you're supposed to keep the foundation along with the drums. Lesson learned. And that's kind of what Triumph was. If you notice, there's like incredible bass players. So it's, oh my God, Billy Sheehan, who used to come to Toronto to see us play. You go, Mike, you're the best bass player in the world, and he can play rigs around for crying out loud, right? I go, Billy, no, forget it, man. You're like on that. You are so far ahead of me now. Anyway, we had a good relationship, but being busy was not part of my kind of style, I guess, for lack of a better word. So there was always space, and leaving that space, and sometimes the absence of clutter makes everything bigger. whereas all the clutter makes everything small.
Yeah.
That's kind of how a lot of that had to do with the bigness of the sound.
As we kind of go historically, you guys had a strong run from 75 to 93. And then I think there was a hiatus between 93 to about 2008. And then, again, a reunion in 2019, more or less.
Yeah, so Rick left the band, I guess, in 1989, I want to say.
Okay.
88 or 89. Bill and I didn't do much. Then we decided, well, maybe we'll make another record. So a friend of ours, Phil X, who's now in Bon Jovi, Phil joined the band. And Phil is a great player, great guy. We made a record called Edge of Excess. Went out and played a few dates. Things were really good, but it wasn't Triumph. It just, it just wasn't the same, and I was not thrilled about being on the road. As good as the band was, because the band was really good, I just thought, maybe if we named the band, Remote Control Unit, it might have been better than calling it Triumph. Because Triumph, to me, it was, I'd always look over, oh, that's not Rick anymore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it just, I don't know, it just wasn't there for me. And Phil kind of felt the same way. So we kind of, that just went away. And then I guess we reconciled with Rick for that 2008 gig in Sweden. Mm-hmm. So we had got inducted into the Canadian Visual Awards Hall of Fame. Part of that was we had to settle up with Rick, and we had to be at least nice to each other, kind of thing. So in order to get that award, because they wouldn't have done it otherwise. So we had a kind of a very uncomfortable meeting, first meeting we had, because we hadn't really seen each other or talked in 15 years.
Yeah.
A long time. So it wasn't too bad, but it wasn't too great, And then banter back and forth over the next month or two, and then finally said, okay, we think we can do this. Then we were doing all these interviews. We took over the Hard Rock Cafe in downtown Toronto, and there was TV, radio, blah, blah, blah. It was like just all day long, just constant media. And we're there, we're having the best of times. We're laughing, we're telling them stories, and it kind of like we gelled. So our agent in Los Angeles, Troy Blakely, rest his soul, passed on a couple of years ago, got a call from the promoter of Sweden Rock Festival saying, hey, I've been seeing that the guys are like getting these awards and they're getting back together, what they think about playing festival here. So Troy gets in touch with us, and he says, I can get a fair chunk of money on the guy for it. And, if you guys want to actually go play. So we sat down and said, what the hell? Sweden, no one's going to know. We could be horrible, and who's going to care? Yeah. Of course, we didn't take into account that there was a thing called the internet. And it was a big deal. So they got like journalists, if they would normally get 50 journalists to cover that event, which is usually 3 days long, they had like 250 journalists wanting to come. And the reason was Triumph is there, right? So it was like big pressure for us to perform. And we didn't have the world's best performance. We had technical issues. But we struggled through it. It was okay. We had a good time. There's another date that came up from, there's a festival outside Oklahoma City called Rocklahoma that was on, so they hired us to headline the Saturday night for that. And then we planned a tour. There's tour plans, buildings on hold, promoters involved, and then the recession hit, right immediately after the plan. And it's like, and it was a bad recession. Like music was not selling, people couldn't afford to go to concerts. It was like pretty miserable out there. So we had to put that on hold, and then 2009 wasn't much better. It's still slow and soft. We thought, going out is going to cost us a lot of money to tool up, a lot of time, and if we go out and do half or three-quarter houses in big buildings, it's going to be not a success, it's a failure. We didn't want to sell out wherever we play, that's always all right. So it didn't happen, and then it was 2011, and 2012, and then, we can't do it. There's just no way that we're going to go out. Couldn't happen. Everybody had some little affordable health issues, and, those kinds of things that would have really made it uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So that was pretty much it until the film, the documentary, the Triumph Rock and Roll Machine documentary that we ended up playing for some, 150 fans at Metalworks, in the warehouse, that they had no idea we were going to play. They just came to, be part of the film kind of thing. And we surprised them by playing 3 songs. So, and that was the last time we played. It was 2019, was for the film.
And then, of course, the pandemic kicks in. So you've got yet another global issue. If it wasn't the recession in 2008, now you've got a pandemic in 2019.
Sure. Yeah, delayed the film by at least 2 years, just with time, because Banger Films, they're the best rock documentary company in the world. They had to close down their offices, so they couldn't use their editing bay. So the editors at home, right? It took forever to upload something for something else, because for the code director to see. Yeah. And it took hours to do a 30-second edit or whatever, for decisions to be made. And it was brutal. Yeah. What those guys went through. And then they had to show it to us just to get our opinion on it. So, a lot of little things. And, that took forever to do that. I mean, we go to Metalworks Studios and everybody would be wearing, masks and gowns and all that and trying to watch it on the screen and try to communicate. Just weird quality, like space on it. So that got delayed, so it finally got finished, and it's out in Canada. It'll be going to go stream live on a pay-per-view in America and the rest of the world, probably first week of May, I think, late April, early May. Okay. And the reviews in Canada have been sensational. Everybody loves it. It's really a very, very good film. I call it more a film than a documentary, because there's a storyline that runs through it all the way, and it'll make you laugh, it'll make you cry, it'll touch you, like documentaries don't really do that very often.
Yeah, they tell the story.
Films, so we call it a film, right? It is documentary style, but it's a film. First.
Nice. Well, and my guess is, if people want to know the specifics because they want to tune in, would the best place to look be triumphmusic.com?
Yeah, there'll be announcements there. There'll be announcements on our Facebooks and Instagrams. And the company that's going to stream it is called Nugs, Nugs, Nugs.net. That's where you would go to get a ticket for it, that kind of thing. We're probably going to do like a kind of a VIP thing for maybe 100 or 150 fans, afterwards or before or somewhere in between. It's hard to, kind of be like herding cats, but it'll work out okay, I think.
One question that comes up a lot from our readers, especially when it's a band that has had such an iconic sound, they want to know how you get your sound, what gear you're playing on, and amplification and all that kind of stuff. So tell us a little bit about what you were playing with.
I bought the bass that I still use off a country and western guy, Fender Jazz. Bought it in 1963, 4, something like that, for $200. I think new it was $300 maybe. It's an amazing bass. It's one of those that every bass I tried, when I put a bass up against it, it wasn't even close. And the way it played, I guess it was kind of a lot to do with it. It had been refinished, but I had it refinished maybe, 3 times. From headstock down neck to body as well. So it didn't weigh as much as a traditional jazz anymore. So it was a lot lighter, maybe a pound, which is a lot, when it's on your neck and everything for, an hour and a half every night. But it's right there. No one else, I couldn't get it refinished anymore because it would have lost the sounding board, really. There'd be no sounding board. It'd be long gone. But the neck was fine and smooth, effortless to play. So it had, a unique sound. On stage, I used, I guess, my final kind of dream amplification system. I had custom built, 6 cabinets, 6 cabs, 4 15s and 2 12s. The 12s were Norelco speakers and the 15s were JBL. So amplification, I had a pair of Crown DC300As. And the rack was not complicated. It was strict. It was Ashley Audio, an Ashley Audio preamp, and an Ashley Audio limiter compressor, and that's pretty much it. And the bass itself. So if I broke a string on stage and had to go to my second bass, it was like I was like, oh man, I hate this thing. So I was more prone to changing strings more often than not, because I really didn't enjoy playing my backup bass, which was a Fender Precision, which was good. I had a couple of Warwicks. One of them got stolen out of the studio. Oh, Metalworks, yeah. And the other one I signed and went into a charity auction for, it got some good dough for the charity, which was great. And so I was kind of out of touch of that. I did buy a Fender. I don't know if you remember when Fender was making the replica basses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I had a replica Jazz. The Fender cut me a nice deal. And I loaned it to a good friend, and the good friend became not a good friend. It just disappeared off the face of the earth. So that went away. I figured, screw that. I don't want any more basses. I have two basses. I like the Precision. I just don't love it, but I love my Jazz. It's like Prince wanted to buy my Jazz bass. He recorded, which album was it? They hunted for a bass for him. They went to every Lion McQuaid stores, which is the go-to music store in Toronto. All over the hunted. They had, couriers going back and forth with Jazz basses. They couldn't find one they needed. So studio manager called me and said, "Fine, would you?" With my studio orders, my bass was at the studio at that time. So Alex, the manager, calls me up, studio manager, and says, "Do you mind if Prince takes a shot at your bass?" He said, "I can't get the bass. It's not working." I said, "Sure, why not?" So I said, "This Purple, as I called him, fell in love with it. He was on all the tracks. Thought it was the best recording bass he ever touched in his entire life, and I wanted to buy it off him."
Oh wow!
So he offered me a lot of money for it, and I like way more than they should have. But I still, I had to pass. I said, "It's just part of me." It's like money's not that important. What's important is why. It's like I love it. Mm-hmm. And if I need it, then it's there. Kind of thing. So yeah, it's a great recording bass as well as a live bass. So in the studio, for example, I use a DI signal and MPEG SVT head with two cameras, and that's where I got the oomph sound was on those cabs. Like I just love the sound of the SVT. Problem with that sucker is the tubes cost a fortune. Right? They got nothing but more expensive. And without my knowledge, the studio would rent it out. So the tubes as I go to use it, and what happened? There's no guts. The guts are gone. And they finally found, we have an envelope full of money here for you. We rented it out. I said, great, go buy tubes. Yeah, so when I used the Warwick, I remember what song, I used the Warwick that did sound better than the Jazz on one song, because I tried. I have the Precision and the Warwick, and for at least I still have them, and the Jazz on the floor. We try each one, depending on which one sounded better. 99 out of 100 times, the Jazz sounded the best. Versatility, like the tone control model, it was like massive effective. You could go from no whack to just a woo. It sounded like chip, 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 chip. You get that edge off it. Mm-hmm. So that's the scoop on that. String-wise, though, strings, I swap between deep Markley ground wounds, or half rounds, and Darios, I guess I used for a while. And sometimes I use Fender flat ones. But they still make. I don't know if they still make them. I don't think so.
I don't know. We'll have to check. Well, and it's interesting that lately there's been so much use of pedals in rock, but in those early days, so much of the sound came from your bass, your strings, and your amp. There wasn't anything else in between.
Don't forget the fingers too.
Oh, that's totally.
Yeah. That's a big difference. Like some people would play it, would get an entirely different sound out of it because of how they played it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what their fingers were like, and the pressure.
Absolutely. Well, and interestingly enough, as we look ahead, we know that the movie releases is upcoming. Are there any other plans for Triumph in the future that we know of? Any thoughts?
We've been so engrossed with we had like a bunch of projects in the last year, including the film. Also, we did a box set to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Allied Forces record. So there's that box set came out as part of Record Store Day worldwide last year. And it's a great box, and it took a long time to put it all together because we wanted it to be first class. It's like there's stuff in there that we didn't even know we had. It's pretty cool. There was that project. There is a tribute record being done in Los Angeles right now that Mike Clegg from Guns N' Roses, Motley Crue, David Coverdale, et cetera, is producing. That, of course, was started 2 years ago, right around the time COVID started. So, studios were locked down. Players didn't want to come to the studio. It was rough to get people to play it. He's still working on it. It's still not done. But he's getting close, which would be good. And that'll come out probably, I don't think it's going to make this year, probably first, quarter one of 2023, my guess. So, but we've been busy, doing promotions and, it's just like interviews as we're doing now. It's been a very hectic schedule. New music-wise, we all agree that if someone comes up with a great song to record, we'll go in the studio and do it. But let's get a great song first. Touring, I don't think is on the table at all. I don't think we can do it. After 2 years ago, 2019, getting ready to do our little 3-song set for the film, it took us a long time to get in shape. I mean, way more rehearsals than I thought. But we would show that there's time. After the first week, we said, I don't think we should play it. It's just like this horrible. We're just a bunch of hackers here. Yeah. But, we said, okay, let's give it another week. And after another week, we go in every day and just do it for a couple hours. And it got better. And then it got better. And then it got better. And then we felt good about it. Mm-hmm. But after playing 3 songs in that quasi-live environment for the film, we were exhausted. Honestly, I'd have to go to a gym where I'd be like a Jagger. I'd run 10 miles a day and do all that kind of stuff. And I'd probably die before I get to the stage. So, and Rick's got a few infirmaries, his hands don't work quite right anymore, and I got a little arthritis, and Gil has some period issues, and if there was something special, and it was maybe some big concert for charity, to do a couple of songs kind of thing, but we're trying to go out and tour. Never say never, I say, but I've done it.
Well, Mike, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us and share your story, both as you developed as a musician, but more so, again, all of decades with Triumph. Very interesting, historic stuff. I'm glad that we can have it so that young rockers can maybe learn, even if nothing else, in the dynamics of dealing with companies and their bandmates and everything, how these things can lead to a decade-long relationship. So, folks, you've seen him here on Bass Musician Magazine, Mike Levine.
Perfect. Thanks, Raul.